This morning we're going to be reading from the epistle or the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament. And so before we do that, we thought we would set up some of the background of this text or the context of it so that we can imagine what this text would have meant to the original readers and hearers. So the book of the Hebrews is the letter that was written in the early days of the church, but this is actually a text that is Jewish people speaking to other Jewish people. Jewish people who considered themselves to be followers of Christ and Jesus' message, writing this text to other Jewish people who wanted to follow Jesus, but who were feeling pressured by their own situation and the fact that following Jesus was not a very popular thing at that time, to feel like they had gone through enough and they were just feeling exhausted and worn out and beaten down. And this text is really encouraging them to remember the heritage of their own faith, to stand strong in the remembrance of the faith of the generations that have gone before them and the ways that they have faced adversity and challenges and calls. So, conversation amongst people of that same tradition, trying to talk about what does it mean to be faithful right now in the midst of what we're going through today, and how do we live that out together? And especially, how do we do that when times are hard? So Jean and I thought that that felt like a powerful message for us to reflect on in these days as well. Before we begin, let's pray together. Keep open, oh, keep open our eyes, our minds, and our hearts, oh God, that we may see with clarity, that we may walk with confidence, and that we may live with courage and justice in your world today and always. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So from the Epistle to the Hebrews, chapter 11. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. They lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was considered faithful and made to bear children because she believed God faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, Abraham, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things they were promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on the earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country that they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for God has prepared a city for them. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Hi, my name is Anna Kendig, and I am the moderator of the Presbytery of the Twin Cities area, and I currently serve at the University of Minnesota Hospital as a chaplain.
I'm Jean Emmons, Vice Moderator of the Presbytery of the Twin Cities. I am a ruling elder and worship at Stillwater.
And we're here this morning with you in worship because we wanted to reflect a little bit about some of the things that have been going on in the presbytery and certainly in our nation and world with you in worship. And so we're very honored to be with you in worship. So Jean, this is one of those texts that is kind of a litany or a list of the generations that these Jewish hearers of the text would have considered their relatives, their generations. So we thought maybe a place to start would be for us to talk about who is in our generations that brings us to this moment and inspires us to action in this time. What comes up for you when you think of your generations?
Well, thinking about my heritage, I guess I grew up in my father's family's farmhouse. And we were about, I don't know, quarter of a mile from the cemetery that also bared the name of my family. So that was a place that we visited a lot, was the cemetery. And so I learned my family history through those names that were on the tombstones. So I guess I kind of maybe learned a little bit on the tragic side of my family. The whole family that was burned down in the fire, everyone knew about that. But I also learned that there were names that passed on through the generations, and beauty in the families that were blended together. And like I said, whenever anyone came to visit us in that farmhouse, we walked down to the cemetery and we toured around and visited everyone that was there.
Yeah, wow. So you kind of learned your history through the physical tombstones and graves of those who had come before you and the stories they carried.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because this text really does have a similar feel of standing at the sort of at the graveside of the generations of faith who have come before the first century, second century folks who are hearing this text, and saying, look, this person, this is what happened to them, and these are the hard times they went through, or these are the challenges they faced, and this is how they responded. And I think that can be a really powerful thing to learn, and sometimes very sad. And so I hear that piece too. So for me, my generations are, so on one side of my family, we have Mexican heritage. And so my family on that side of the family all come from Mexico City and Oaxaca and northern Mexico around Monterrey and things like that. So we have lots of stories of that side of the family. On the other side of the family, half my maternal grandmother's side is Lebanese, and so they are second or third generation immigrants on that side of the family, and Lebanese and Syrian. And so a lot of that heritage you can hear is recent immigration stories. But on my paternal grandfather's side, the heritage is British, and they came a couple generations back. And so because of marriage and things like that, apparently on that wing of the family, I have a relative that dates back to the Mayflower. So I didn't know that until recently. I just had this story of my family as being recent immigrants, but clearly there's this other piece that I hadn't known. And so kind of picking up on that theme that you talked about the sad pieces, is that also means that while that could be something that I might be proud of or interested in and so on, it also means that I have a piece of my heritage that has a long history in this country, which probably also means that I'm connected to a lot of different very complex and painful things that happened in this country, including slavery. So whether there were slaveholders in that part of the family or whether they were complicit with slavery in some other way, I don't know how it would be possible that all of the people I'm connected to by blood would not have been had some complicity or complexity with that. So that's the sad piece, or the hard piece, or the piece that I think we're wrestling with as a nation as we talk about even something like monuments, where monuments aren't the same thing as history, right? They're a sort of, so they're often a very, sometimes they're sanitized, but they're also heroic, making something heroic from history. And so that gets really complicated when we turn history into heroes. But also, there's this strand that inspires me in my story. And so I think of my maternal grandmother, who I'm named after. My middle name is Marina. So Marina in North Mexico during the Spanish flu as a young mother, right? That story for me inspires me with what she would have had to muster for courage and what she would have had to hold for her own faith. She was Presbyterian in Mexico as well, and her faith was very important to her. And as I recall, my mom tells this story about how every day she would wake up, and when she had to leave the house to run an errand or whatever, she would say that she was stepping out in faith. And so, and she would say, en el nombre de Dios, in the name of God, and then she would step out the door. And so that idea of walking by faith actually has this person in my life who I remember when I think about that. So who inspires you, or whether it's in your own family tree or in the nation, when you think about your prior generations?
I guess my father was a very thoughtful, always wanting to learn about things type of person. He worked at the local grocery store in the dairy department, and people would say to me, "Your father scared me again today because he talked to me through those milk cartons." But he did. He wanted to connect with people. He wanted to be there to know your story. He was the one that kept me knowing that I did have faith, that I did have the reason to go to church and share my stories with people.
Wow, that's really cool. And I think those pieces of the people that we love and care about, and in all of their complexity, is something that we can hold on to, and is certainly reflected in this text. I don't know everything about my maternal great-grandmother, whose name I carry. I'm sure she had faults as well as wonderful blessings. And so when I look at this text, I also remember that the people named in the text, like Abram, like Noah, and so on, they were complicated. They were messy. Sarah as well. If you read the actual stories in the Old Testament that this comes from, this feels almost like a sanitized version of their story. They were much more complicated and messy people than this. And I think that's true for all of us. And so holding that intention where we can be inspired, we can hold the hard things, and we can also just recognize the messy middle that most of us live in, and that we've inherited from those generations that come before us. So this text kind of has three different components: that past piece of looking backwards into heritage and history, and then that present piece of saying, like, you also likewise can walk by faith, and then this future looking reminder of what we're headed toward. So if we have talked about the past a little bit, let's think about the present. What does walking by faith mean for you in these times, Jean?
It's scary. You know, and I even think about this text and say, well, hindsight is great. You know what happened with them. Now in this world, we don't have that yet, and it is only with hope and faith that sometimes I can bear to face the day, because we haven't learned from our history. We haven't learned what we should be doing with everyone to help everyone.
I think that's really powerful, because I hear you holding that piece of what, when we wake up scared, what do we do? And knowing that we haven't faced the full truth of our stories, knowing that we haven't done the work that we should have done. And yet at the same time, trying to muster that faith to wake up, to stand up, and to move. I think that's really powerful and really true. I echo that as well. So in my setting, I work in the hospital, so there's the realities of COVID going on, and the complexity of working in healthcare in this time. But there's also the realities of racism as we're kind of talking about here as well. And so as we feel this crunch of all the different ways that we can feel separated from each other, that we can feel distant because of the ways that COVID has shaped what needs to be true for us to be healthy together at this time, we can feel that same distance when it comes to how do we have conversations? How do we take action when it comes to race and other types of isms and oppressions and injustices that are harming our society and have been for hundreds and hundreds of years? So yeah, it can feel hard to get out of bed in the morning. Go ahead.
And not be only thinking of ourselves.
Yes.
Of you said that you were willing to know about your ancestry. Sometimes I think that I'm scared to know what my ancestors did. And so is that me just wanting to stick my head in the sand and say, I'm a good person. I don't need to do anything more.
Yeah. I think those are really good questions, Jean, and like really good wrestling that I'm hearing you do. And I think what's so hard about walking by faith in this moment is that wrestling feels like we wake up one morning and we wrestle, and then the next morning we wake up and we do some more wrestling. And we feel like we haven't, washed off the caked mud from our last wrestling match before we're in for another bout.
Right.
And so I think it can feel exhausting. And, one of the things I was taught about preaching in the tradition that I learned to preach in was that you have to talk about the bad news to get to the good news. And so I'm really glad that we're getting in here and kind of wrestling with the hard stuff, because we all know that it exists. And I think we can get to the faith and hope that is just baked into this text. But we have to realize that the people who were hearing this text weren't feeling it at that moment either. Like, they needed these words because they didn't feel them. They weren't feeling particularly inspired. So yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I was thinking about is, as we're, talking about faith and kind of the difficulties with it, is that this text actually has two different words for faith in it in the Greek that it came from. So the first word is kind of like this word that implies foundation. So the idea of faith, that's about the bedrock that we can stand on, the framework that we can hold on to. So it's like the guardrails, right? Like we can really grab on if the road is slick. And then there's this other word that is about almost like a jolt. And I think that word is way more interesting to me, because I feel like I understand faith as a foundation. I understand faith as a bulwark, as it often gets called in the Old Testament, or something you can really hold on to, or is a fortress. But understanding faith as like a jolt, or as scholar Amy Peeler, who's an associate professor of New Testament at Wheaton College, she says, faith presents that proof even a rebuke of things that you have difficulty seeing. And I think that idea of faith is almost like putting, like you're making your eyes go wide open, you know, so that you can see what you can't see, so that you get that caffeine jolt of alertness and awakeness to what you know, were looking at through half closed eyes before. And so she says, if this community is beginning to struggle with doubt about God's good character, they may need this jolt. You can stand firmly upon faith, and you will not want to deny or reject the evidence that it represents and offers to you. So I think that piece is just really interesting, because it reminds me that there are things that I might not have seen before, or might be seeing in a new way in this time when COVID and the racism and other structures of injustice in our country is so obvious, that actually can help spark my faith. And that feels new to me, right? That feels like a new thought. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think the other piece that we could go to is this piece of, at the end of the text, it says, all of these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on the earth. And it says here, people who say such things know that they are looking for a country of their own. They were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. So what comes up for you when you think of that idea that all of these generations, Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abram and Sarah, and there are more that are listed after this part of the text, were still living by faith when they died and never quite saw the fulfillment of the walking journey that they had been on?
I'd say they had to. We have to. We have to have faith that what we did will help the next generations. I have two lovely grandchildren, and I want things to be better for them. We just have to. Yeah.
I hear that. And I hear like your heart is in this for the people you love. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's really powerful, because it reminds us that in some way, you know, it talks about Abram and the generations that he, you know, were like stars in the heavens. Well, he didn't know all of his descendants by name, but you have to believe that he had a special interest and love and care for what could come for them. So yeah, absolutely. What comes up for me is just this idea of believing that what is here is not all there is. So sometimes we talk about ourselves and our citizenship in, say, in this nation, or we talk about ourselves in our membership in the church that we belong to, and we think of those as like final things, like descriptors of who we really are. But what this text is kind of saying is like, actually, no, like your country is God's country. You know, it's in other words, the United States is not where we're really citizens. We're citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Let's put it that way, right? That we are citizens and inheritors of something much bigger and much more beautiful. And so our particular churches, our particular communities, even our particular families are reflections of this bigger, wider reality that we're a part of. And so that feels really inspiring for me, only because it reminds me that I have to keep my eyes that far in the distance when I'm walking. I remember when I was learning to drive, which is not quite the same thing, but I was learning how to drive, and I would want to look like right in front of the car for what was coming on the road. And I had to be told and taught to be looking further ahead, because if you don't, you're gonna miss what's coming in the future or what's coming in front of you. And so keeping our eyes on the prize that's in the distance is part of the work. I think what's really hard for me right now is that I've heard people say things like, I really want to solve this once and for all. And I don't think we can solve racism once and for all, but I think we can take the step that this generation has to take that will make it better for the next generation so that they can do the work they have to do. And I think the same thing is true with COVID. Like, we can't just automatically fix it, but we can do the best job we can to take care of each other so that the cost is less, so that we can move forward in a good way together. So I think this is really hard and challenging, and I think this text was meant to comfort the Jewish people who heard it. Mm-hmm. But I also can imagine that a couple people kind of walked away like, oh, that's not as inspiring as I wanted it to be.
Right. That's not going to fix all my problems.
Yeah, right. And so I like it that it's kind of in this in-between place of saying, like, by faith, all these amazing things have happened, and you too can participate in that, and you are called to that because this is hard work. And yet you're not going to see the culmination of everything that you do, and that is faith. And man, it made me think of some words from Reverend Dr. Tracy Blackman, who's been very involved with the Black Lives Matter movement. I believe she's a UCC pastor, and she talked at the Conspire conference around racism at Montreat this past fall. And she said, you need to start walking by faith to the place where God will use you. And so as we stand in this good news that God is going to walk with us on the journey, that God is going to walk us toward where God can use us. She also said, God did not bring you here for your entertainment, but because you have work to do. And so even as God brings us to be on this earth for joy and flourishing and delight, God also invites us to do the work of building the realm of God in whatever small way that we can. So I think in a lot of ways, this text is kind of like the whole enchilada of past, present, and future, and kind of asks us to look at that big picture and remember that God is a part of all of it from beginning to end. And so that is where the foundation of that strong bulwark of faith is founded. And then we can let that jolt of truth-telling and seeing justice and moving toward peace and standing where God is asking us to stand so that we can do justice in a good way, that can all happen through the other type of faith that is in this text as well. Mm. So thanks for talking with me, Jean.
Yeah,
this was a good conversation, and we're going to be continuing it, by the way, with our spiritual anti-racism pilgrimage this coming year. The Presbytery is putting this together, and it will actually be an opportunity for all of us to walk by faith through some of the history of Minnesota and Wisconsin, through some action that we can take around anti-racism work in this state and the states that we are a part of, and also do some spiritual practice reflection on what does it take to walk by faith in this time when it comes to justice work and peacemaking, and even the challenges of COVID. What are the spiritual skills that we can use to work through these times? And so we'll be talking about some of that together. More information will be coming, and we invite everyone in the Presbytery along.
Thank you.